Hi, I'm Chris Rainey, and what you're looking at right now is the Sully Wrapper. This video is to give the student a tutorial to use to help him get up to speed so that by the end of the week, Friday, he's familiar with the machine and he knows how to wrap. There are 5 pieces to the Sully Wrapper. The center section that's movable, and the center section has all the important workings of the machine. There are 2 support arms or supports. There is the track in which the support arms in the center section slide back and forth. And then finally, there is a separate support, an outrigger if you will, that helps support the rod section when we've got the smaller, lighter end of the rod section in the wrapping machine and the ferrule section outside the 2 supports. The center section has 2 posts where you can put your spools. It has a tension roller right here. It has 2 lower guides on the center section. Moving up, this is the tension arm or the tensioner, and there is a guide for the thread here and also at the very end of the tensioner. From the top of the tensioner, the thread goes down to the center section once again to one of these 2 final guides here. And from here, the silk thread is parked in this spring. I'm going to show you how to thread the machine now. You'll take the spool of thread, and the thread will go closest to the top of the machine. I want the thread coming over the top of this bobbin, and the first place it goes is to the tensioner or roller at the rear of the machine. I'm going to put this little tensioning spring on the spool. So, from the top of the spool closest to the center section, around the tensioning wheel to the first support, or guide, first guide, then up the tensioning arm. So spool, thread at the top closest to the center section, over to the tensioning wheel to the first guide. That's how you thread the lower part of the machine. So from this lower guide, it goes up to the first guide, the tensioning arm, and it comes from the inside to the outside of the center section. From there, it goes to the top guide on the tensioning arm, and then down to the lower front guide on the center section. And from this lower front guide, it gets parked in this spring right here. It's a good idea to go over the previous section on how to thread the binder, because far too often when you're wrapping your rod section, you're going to hear this noise. And that means that the thread's broken, the thread slipped out of the spring where you park it, or it slipped out of your hands. So knowing how to quickly rethread it is important. Keep in mind that when you have all the thread bunched down around here, the best thing to do is to clear it away all the way back to the spool of thread, making sure that the thread has not slipped underneath the spool nor behind the roller or around this little wing nut. So when we begin to wrap the rod section, first thing we want to do is take the cords on each one of these arms and secure the rod section. This accomplishes two things. It keeps the section from moving back and forth, and it also keeps the section from lifting up and away from our work. So this stabilizes the rod section for us and allows us to begin wrapping. Okay, I now have a very large stripping guide taped onto the rod section. You'll notice that there's a lot of room on the guide foot, from the tip of the guide foot to the center of the guide, so that I can bring my thread up here before I have to remove this little piece of tape. Now that small piece of tape is a 3M product, and it's 1/8 of an inch wide. So all my guides will be taped to the rod section by 1 foot. Then I'm going to take a much larger piece of tape and secure the other foot, leaving these little tag ends loose so that I can remove that piece of tape easily. And of course, centering up the guide feet on the rod section is important as well. So here I've removed one side of the tape and I'm moving the guide foot over to center it up on the flat. You can see that right there. So now we're ready to begin wrapping. I'm going to use an oversized piece of thread to show you how to start the wrapping process. The thread gets unparked from the spring and placed over the top of the rod section. I always like to start at the end of the foot of the guide and wrap up to the center of the guide. Ideally, I want 3 wraps before I touch the foot. So 3 turns, complete turns, and then I'll touch the foot of the guide. This is a right to left wrap. So what I'm going to do is reach over, bring the thread around, moving the thread from right to left. So the thread is going in that direction. So my first move is to take the running part of the thread as opposed to the tag end of the thread and cross the running end of the thread over the tag end. Now I'm going to turn the rod section towards me, and as I do so, my left hand in this instance is going underneath the rod, allowing the running part of the thread to cover the tag end. Now you'll notice I've released all the tension on the tag end. And I continue to turn, keeping the tag end towards the left. And the running end continues to cover the tag end. So 3 turns, and I've touched the guide foot. I continue to turn, the rod section is turning towards me, and I'll get 5 to 8 wraps, and then I'm going to cut the tag end cut. I'm going to continue to wrap towards the center of the guide. And as I approach the middle of the guide foot, I'm going to insert a closed loop to pull the thread through. When I cut the tag end for the first time, I saved it, and here it is, and I'm going to make a loop, and the closed end of the loop is going to go in the direction of travel. In this instance, the closed end of the loop will go to the left. I like to place the loop on the flat of the rod section opposite the guide. And you saw how this flat is facing me. It's not straight up, it's facing me. And you saw how I could take this loop and simply gently lift the running end of the thread and slip it under onto the center of the flat. Now, about 8 to 12 more wraps is needed, and I'm going to remove that long piece of tape that I had that was helping me align the guide foot and continue up the guide foot to a point at which the wire loops start to leave the flat. So this is far enough. When I wrap, I keep both my hands with the knuckles up. At this point, I'm going to take the thumb pad of my left hand and press it against the side of the rod section. Then I'm going to grab the running end and I'm going to pull it towards me. So with my left thumb pad pressing against the side of the wraps, holding everything in place, I'm able to pull the running end and put it in the spring and park it. You can see I now have slack on the running end of the thread. At this point, I'm going to cut the thread. With the running end cut, I now have a new tag end. And I'm going to take the tag end and run it through the closed end of the loop, like that. At this time, I'm going to hold tension with my right hand, and I'm going to switch my right hand for my left hand to hold tension on the new tag end. So here I go. Still have all my knuckles up. Now I've switched. I still have tension on the entire wrap. Now I'm going to pull the loop so that it snugs up the new tag end against the last wrap. It's now locked in place. At this point, the tag end is going to be cut as close as possible to the loop without cutting the loop. The loop is now going to be pulled away at a 45-degree angle. In this instance, a 45-degree angle in that direction. If we were wrapping the other foot and going from left to right, we would be pulling this loop at a 45-degree angle in that direction. You do not want to pull parallel to the rod shaft or towards you. Always away from you. After taking that rod section out of the binder and jumping up and down on it, I did manage to pull the tag end, the loop, through the wrap. And you'll notice that with this technique, there's no pull through. There's no little nub to trim. There's no long tag end to trim. A very clean way to do it. Alright, I'm going to demonstrate how to wrap from, now we're going to go from left to right. So once again, the running end of the thread goes over the top of the rod section. And I'm going to take the tag end, I'm going to reach under and take it over the top towards the right. So the tag end goes over the top towards the right. The running end now gets placed over the top of the tag end. What I did was to take the running end, place it over the tag end. Then I start to turn the rod section towards me. At the same time, my left hand is moving away from me with the tag end. What I'm trying to do is lock that tag end with the overwraps from the running end. So you have to have some slack in here when you get to this point. Otherwise, you won't make any progress. It's important to keep the tag end off to the right in this instance, because every time the running end makes one revolution, we want it to lock this tag end down one more time. So 3 wraps, and we're at the tip of the guide foot. We continue on till we have 5 or more wraps, at which point we can cut this tag end. Now, it's also important to know that the running line, the running part of the thread, is always at an angle. In this instance, it's off slightly in this direction. This is an exaggeration. That allows the running line to slip over the last wrap and come in tight. We want to keep these wraps tight. And to that end, we have what's called a burnishing tool, where we can push any wrap that is loose, we can push it up back against the previous wrap. Okay, that's called packing the threads. Okay, so at this point we have enough wraps to lock down the tag end, so we'll cut the tag end off. Now, as before, we'll wrap until we get to about the middle of the guide foot, at which time we'll introduce our tag end, which is now a loop. And again, the closed end of the loop goes in the direction of our travel. We're going from left to right, so the closed end of the loop will be on the right. Once again, you can see how the flat opposite the guide is facing me rather than being just straight up. It's facing me. That allows me to take this loop, gently lift the running end of the thread and slide it under and center it in the top flat of the rod section. So we continue to wrap. Nice thing about the Sullys, if you start to go over the top, you can back it up. You saw that, I hope. So here I'll demonstrate it again. If we find the thread going in the wrong direction, going over the top, we can simply back it up a little bit. Move the rod section back and forth as we need to keep this angle correct. So we're going to get to the point where we're almost touching the masking tape, and I'm just going to try and pull the two tag ends of the masking tape. I'm going to try and pull them up. This is important. You don't want to just tear away at this masking tape. You want to worry it off a little bit at a time. That way you're not going to disturb your snake guide or stripping guide. So there we go. So that's out of the way. And again, we just finish up our wrap. It is important that the length of the left wrap is very close to the length of the right wrap. You can see that visually, or you can use a set of dial micrometers and simply measure your last wrap and make sure that your second wrap is the same length. So with both wraps the same length, again, my hands are knuckles up, and I'm going to take my thumb, left thumb again, and I'm going to press it against the side of the wrap so I can have access to the closed end of my loop. Then I'm going to pull the running end and I'm going to park it in that spring, and I've got some slack in there now. At that point I can cut the running end, so I now have a new tag end, and this new tag end goes through the loop, closed end of the loop. So now with my right hand I have a lot of tension on the wrap because I've got the new tag end. So I can take my loop and pull it so that the loop closes around this last wrap and starts to pull it up close and hard against the last wrap. At that point, once again, everything's locked in place, and now I can trim this tag end very close to the loop. And again, this is, instead of 6/0 thread, this is 80-pound green spot. So there's that, and now, as I said before, the closed end of the loop, the two tag ends get pulled away from me at a 45. In this case, because I'm going from left to right, I'm going to pull them at a 45. Okay, once again, we've pulled the tag end through, and we've hidden it underneath all of these other wraps. And the key to that is to put your closed end loop, put your loop in about midway in your job. Don't forget that. If you forget it, you're going to have to go back. And then with the burnishing tool, you simply can run the round part of the tool gently across the wraps, evening everything up. So now we're going to try in real time. Do one of these. I've taken the wrap off the right side of the stripper, and I'm going to now wrap with some real silk thread. Harder to see, but once it's on the rod, it's more aesthetically appealing. So the thread goes over the top of the rod section. I am on the right side of the guide, and I'm moving to the left. So my tag end will be wrapped around and brought over to my left. So now the running end is to the right of the tag end. I'm going to seesaw this back and forth until I get a little room there between my start of my thread and my guide foot, beginning of my guide foot. Remember, we were talking about an ideal 3 wraps till you touch the guide foot. So the running end gets picked up and placed over the tag end. Then the rod section is rotated towards me, and notice I've got a lot of slack. My left hand moved away from me and introduced some slack to that, and you can see how the thread is moving, the running end is moving to the left and covering the tag end. That's what's holding that tag end in place. So we're just going to get our 3 wraps and be at the guide foot. Just like that. From there on, we'll continue to wrap the running end of the silk thread to the left. So it's going to climb up over the guide foot. I'm not too concerned about the amount of gap between my threads right now. I want to make sure that I get my thread up on top of the guide foot, and then I can slide it down. And the same with the next. Same with the next one. Get it way up on the guide foot and then slide it down. You get a nice transition from the rod section to the guide foot. Now I've packed these threads together so that there's not much in the way of a gap between any of the threads. Kind of pack them together to make for a nice look. This next step is important. Take your tag end and get it on your side of the machine, and notice I'm pulling down again at a 45 towards me. A little tug there, and what that's doing is it's tightening up these first few wraps because they could be a little loose. So 5 to 8 wraps, and then you can cut your thread. Alright, and once again that thread is kept, this tag end is kept. I keep it on my lap on my left thigh. And we continue to wrap, the rod section being turned towards us. And the nice thing about the Sully Wrapper is if you have to back up a little bit, you can. And we can maneuver the rod section to control the gap between the wraps that are already on the rod and the wrap that we're trying to lay down. At this point I'm about halfway up the guide foot. I'm going to introduce my loop. Closed into the loop. Closed end of the loop goes to the left because I'm going from right to left. Notice that the top flat, the flat opposite the guide, is actually facing towards me as opposed to straight up. Okay, so now I'll continue to wrap. Covered my loop with a dozen or more wraps. Ideally 10 to 12 is the right number. So again, as before, I'm going to take my left thumb pad and press it tightly against the side of the rod section, holding all the wraps in place. Then I'm going to take my running thread, I'm going to pull it and park it so I have a little slack in it. I'm going to cut it. Then I'm going to take my new tag end and I'm going to put it through the closed end of my loop and pull it taut. Okay, I've got good tension on this tag end. Alright, there's a lot of tension. I'm not going to let go. A lot of tension there. So I'm going to switch hands. Again, everything is knuckles up here. It just makes it easier. Switching hands, I've got a lot of tension on my tag end. And you can see I'm pulling on the loop, and I get the loop to lock in. So that loop has locked the thread in place. This tag end is pulled tight. Now I cut the tag end that loop by taking the sharp and pressing it down on the bamboo section close to the end of the tag end, and then cutting it. Then I'm going to take my thread for the loop and pull away from me at a 45. Just like that. And now, as you can see, there's no pull through. It's a nice finish, a lot less work to do. And at this point, if we need to do any kind of burnishing, we can use the back of the burnishing tool and just massage these threads. If there's some gaps, we can push them and pack them. It's better to do that as you wrap. So this should get you going on your wrapping. If you look at this each night during the week, during class, and practice a wrap or two, by Friday you'll know what's in store for you, and there won't be anywhere near the frustration otherwise.